Hello and welcome to episode number 327 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. A very special episode we have for you today. A podcast about board games, the latest hotness, and how to have fun with your friends, even when you're losing. We have spent the winter months, the winter time, counting down our top 50 favorite board games of all time. I could not be more excited for today's installment, the final installment. Did someone say penultimate last episode? Because it's important to me that someone said penultimate.
We didn't. We missed that.
That is the word I used as a 10-year-old to try to sound smarter than everyone else. Am I wrong?
No, that worked.
You're not wrong.
For
It's
that.
a good word.
For sure.
Yeah, exactly. We are going to get right into it today. These are the 20th.
Yeah,
These are no for the outro, maybe. We're trying to go high right now.
Yeah, I know. This is
because
important.
this is the creme de la creme, the most important episode every year. The top 10 board games. You're going to
This
get
is
20
the 3-star Michelin episode.
Yes, but even better because we're not a tire company.
That's true. That's important.
It's an oops, all bangers, 10-1. Mark Neilan, MN. Mark, why don't you kick us off with your 10th favorite board game of all time? Number 10.
My 10th favorite game of all time is up 3 spots. This is a Martin Wallace classic, although there was some dispute about who designed it. I don't know all the details, but I know it was a very tricky affair. But this is Age of Steam from 2002.
Choo-choo.
That's our classic train signal. Whenever we talk about trains, that's the sound effect that comes up, as all longtime listeners will surely know.
They're all doing it at home, Mark. They know.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, that's sort of our thing. Anyway, Age of Steam is a pick up and deliver, a route building game. A little bit of an economic part to it, but not as in depth as like an 18xx stock market sort of situation. But it has the thing that has become clearer and clearer to me is like one of my favorite things in board games, which is the whole route building, cut off your opponent's situations that we talked about with Blue Lagoon and that kind of thing. I love that kind of interaction and aggressiveness when I'm playing a game, and this game, Age of Steam, has that in spades. Again, the economic side of it isn't super complicated, but I like that about this because you're focusing more about the board and about the whole pick up and deliver aspects. It's also got the added benefit of having hundreds of maps that allow you to have like weird play styles or weird special rules. There's like a heaven and hell map, I think, and a moon map and all these things that have slightly different variations. So you can, if you really like it, you can dig into it pretty hard. For how intimidating it can be and how sort of brutal it can be, in those ways, it's not super beginner friendly. But in terms of teaching the game, it's not overly complicated. I think you can teach it to anybody who has some familiarity with board games in general, and you can have a good time with it. That's Age of Steam,
Mark.
my 10th favorite game of all time. Yes.
No. Don't outro. We talk.
No, I don't know. That's my outro on the description, but now we're going to intro into the discussion. Discussion.
Okay. I was mistaken. Yeah, you're a pro. Okay, so I know Mr. President, right?
Yeah.
Like you love that because
You don't have to
get
call
to
him that.
Well, exactly, because he gets to role play as something that he'll never be and has no right even thinking of himself as such, right? Like that's a given. Am I wrong? And so here, how much of your love of Age of Steam, 1830, and all these Cube Rails games is just like a weird guy obsession with trains?
Okay. I would say that my guy obsession with politics being tied to Mr. President is much stronger than my guy obsession with trains, because I think my guy obsession with trains is non-existent. I don't really like trains in general. In terms of like, I have no desire to be on a train. I don't like looking at trains. I don't like learning about trains. I have no other train interest whatsoever aside from as far as they can get me in playing a fun board game. So...
All right. So, Mark, did you have a toy train set when you were a kid?
I did not have a toy train set. Again, I have no affinity to trains. Just let me make this clear. I don't like trains, except in specific board games.
Games. Now edit that together. No, yeah, after your sentence, after your confessional. That's good. Okay, the amount of men, and could be others, women, other people as well, that like secretly love trains or whatever, they
Yeah.
disguise it as like a Christmas addiction, but then you're buying like weird fake Steam to put in this train that's like running around your Christmas. It's for my son, Calvin. Well, I don't know. You're buying like very expensive train replicas here. Do you know
Right.
what I mean?
Right.
And I thought that maybe I'd uncovered why 1830 and those games is so popular.
Right.
But you're
Could
saying
be. I mean, I'm
there's
not
no
saying-
fetish.
Not over here. I can't speak for the.
Oh, there's no
Board ga-
definitely
yeah.
over here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish everyone could see your face because I can tell now that
Turning
there's definitely
red.
no train fetish
Yeah.
over at Mark's house.
I am sweating like a.
Do you have a map that you like love or that you've discovered this year, or is it just like you're kind of still a classic boy?
So when I first started playing Age of Steam way back when with my friend Andreas, he had a whole bunch of unique maps that he acquired, and we dabbled with a couple of those. For me, I just like playing sort of like the base ones because I am not yet so immersed in it that I sort of need the variety. But I just like knowing that it's there. Like I always have this aspirational thing about like one day I'm going to have like mastered Steam and I'll master all the basic maps, and I'll need to go to these crazy, just to feel something. I'll need to go to these like exotic maps. I'll get to that point one day. I'm not there yet, but I just like knowing they're there. So I'm still a basic Steam boy at the current moment, but I aspire for better things, for higher things.
But some of
I
them
did
get
hear-
like really weird, right? Like I remember you telling me about one that was like a heaven and hell
yeah,
themed one.
yeah. There's one where you have to like transport souls to heaven
Yeah.
or something like that. Yeah, there's a lot of kooky ones out there. So
But Neilan, you heard in that description like him say feel something exotic,
Yeah.
and then something fetish under his breath, right?
100%.
Yeah. It's a
well,
little weird,
I did
Mark.
definitely say sweating. I would have hoped you would have been focusing on that part of it, but
They have whole conventions for Age of Steam, apparently.
yeah.
They're like,
go.
this is like, I don't know. Do we know who John whatever Borer is? Yeah, you called it Martin Wallace. This isn't Martin Wallace game, bro.
I mean, look, there's the whole
You
thing
outed
here.
him.
I know that it got so contentious that like once Martin Wallace got the rights to it, he couldn't call it Steam or Age of Steam, so he called it like Martin Wallace's train game or something. There was some. It got to like some weird.
Distinct train game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's right. Age of Steam, my 10th favorite game of all time.
Age of Steam's good. I want to go back to it. I still only played it the once, maybe just over a year ago, but I still keep putting it like near the bottom of my list. But I think with another play, it could be move up there for sure.
Yeah. We played it at some convention. Was it Gen Con or something? I can't remember.
It must have been Dice Tower maybe a couple of years ago. I forget.
Maybe. Yeah, that's right. That's probably right.
Should I go?
Do you have a fetish?
No.
Well, I guess you can go.
Okay. I'm not sure if that's going to make the main cut, but anyway. My number 10 favorite game is also a Martin Wallace game. It is
Double
Brass.
designer crossover.
Yeah, exactly. We're doing that now. It is Brass Birmingham. I adore this, honestly, for some of the same reasons that Age of Steam is, I think, also popular. That route building, that shared infrastructure, getting in other people's way, that sort of very specific process of like carving out areas of the board that are going to be the towns and folks and the industries that you're focusing on. It's a heavy economic game that somehow still feels like it just has a really solid thrust to its gameplay loop. It doesn't feel like it's just one of those very heavy games where there's everything thrown at it. The loop of what you're doing when it comes to buying industries, placing them in cities, and trying to flip them is quite easy to lay out. It's just kind of the intricacies of how that works and how all these systems interconnect. That's kind of where the real complexity is. And strategically, it has a lot of depth. There's a lot to sort of learn and internalize before you can do really, really well at Brass. It also has trains in it, so choo-choo.
Well,
Yeah, I adore Brass. I think that the question between the two versions, whether Birmingham and Lancashire, is very contentious. I don't think there's as much between the two as a lot of people will make out, but I slightly prefer Birmingham. But yeah, great game.
And you had a little bit of a road with this one. You had a very bad first impression, right?
Oh yeah, my first game of this was awful. And you know, it's one thing that I say a lot. You know that a game is good when you can have as astoundingly bad a game of it in your first game and still feel like, man, I want to do that again.
it does make me think, Neilan, with your love of Yellow and Yangtze and Brass Birmingham, what other like medium to medium heavy games that with like one little twist kinder that suddenly they would
Totally.
like pop into your top. And not that I agree with you. I think the difference is like I think I prefer Lancashire because it's has a reputation for being meaner and the cover is way better. But like that's a stupid reason. The cover is way better though. Let's be reasonable, folks.
It has your Daniel Day-Lewis look-alike on the front, right?
Yeah, you drink the milkshake when you look at it.
I think that's an interesting point because like I think that there's two ways to like twist on that, which is there's a little bit of slightly more development to make it more attuned to modern tastes. Like I kind of came up more through the modern era of board games. You want to look like that way, and if you were to ask me, I would say that they are slightly improving it, quote unquote. But that's maybe a more contentious take. But I think there's a reason it like exploded in popularity that is not just akin to like the Roxley remake at the time it came out. But
you're probably anticipating the second edition of Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea.
Oh yeah, oh man,
yeah.
When that comes out, then that's where we really
that'll
start
change everything.
Let me tell you. But yeah, that is Brass Birmingham, my number 10.
Number 9.
My number 9 game is up a spot from last year. This is Arboretum, card game, no board involved. This is a top board game list, and yet there is no board in this game. So I'm really breaking with tradition here and going for a boardless board game. Arboretum is a game about building an arboretum, but for as nice and relaxing as that theme makes it out to be, and the art is lovely with these beautifully drawn trees, it is a super, super cutthroat card game. Every time I bring this game up, I always say that this is a game where on your turn, you always wish at least I always wish that I could just pass, because every decision that you have to make, and the decision tree is pretty narrow. It's not like your decisions are difficult because there's so many of them to make, or they're so intricate, or they're so hard to remember like what the rules are. The rules are really, really simple. You are drawing 2 cards and you are playing a card and discarding a card. So it's like draw 2, play 1, discard 1. That's all there is that you're doing on each turn. But the choices you make in those 4 simple choices are where the pressure and the difficulty is, because where are you going to draw the cards from? You can draw them from the shared draw pile, which is sort of also the game timer. And, since all the cards in the draw deck are face down, you don't know what you're getting. But you can draw them from any of your opponent's discard piles. And so there, you know what you're getting, which is good. But also your opponents know what you're drawing. So that's bad. And then when it comes to the playing of the card and the discarding of the card, the other half of your decisions, this is where the sort of heart of Arboretum is so pronounced and is so difficult, because in the game of Arboretum, depending on how many players are involved, there are a number of suits of cards that are going to be in your shared deck, and you're trying to score the different suits by placing them sort of in a couple of rows in a tableau in front of you. But in order to score any of the suits, at the end of the game, you must have the most points of that suit in your hand. That is the foundational crux of Arboretum, is to score a string of cards in your tableau. You must have at the end the highest number of points of any of your opponents, or you score nothing. So all the work you've built in building that tableau is for naught, because your opponent pipped you by 1 point. And so there's also the inherent difficulty of, if you want to score a lot of points, you got to play a lot of cards out of that suit, but then you're not going to be able to carry that many in your hand as a result. And as you're doing that, you're also playing defensively, because if you see Callan or Neilan or Christina building a long line of maple trees, you know that you need to hold maple trees in your hand to try to make sure that they don't score it. And there are only 8 cards of each suit, so it's pretty easy to figure out where things are. Like if Callan has the 4, 5, and 6 maple out, you know that holding the 8 maple, if you draw it or have it in your hand or whatever, is a pretty strong move. So there's just a lot to consider. And again, every turn in Arboretum, that card you have to discard is just so tough to decide, because I'm giving this card up. You're always convinced that somebody's going to take it to block you, or take it because that's going to ensure that they're going to be able to score their trees. It just is a game that's full of really, really tough decisions, and yet not difficult in terms of the rule set or anything like that. It's all that stuff gets out of the way. You know what's going on, and yet it's just excruciating the whole way through. There is a brand new implementation on BGA, so if you want to try it out,
cool.
There's a way to do it there.
I was just going to ask, and I think maybe that answers the question, because I remember this used to be your number 2 game, if I'm not mistaken, and then maybe slipped down and is rising back up. Is that because of BGA?
Yeah, I don't know if I'll ever see it rise to the heights that it used to be, because when it arrived on BGA, I thought, oh, okay, maybe this is a chance for Arboretum to come back into like my top 5 or whatever. The problem still is that I think that, first of all, I think I enjoy Arboretum much more in person. I don't know why that is. I think I've only played Arboretum async on BGA, and I think that sort of like cuts the tension a little bit.
Yeah,
and
that makes sense.
And that tension is so important for my enjoyment of Arboretum. So there's that. And I think that there are just some people who are just not going to like the tension of it. I don't know. It hasn't been a game that's been as enhanced by BJ as a lot of other games on my list. And I think, as I mentioned, there's like a calculation you can do in Arboretum when you're sitting at the table and like, again, seeing what numbers are played out. When it's async on BJ, it makes that a little more like note-takey or trivial. Like if people's cards are out there, it just lessens the pressure and the excitement of that part of the game for me. So I still like playing it on BGA for sure, but it's not a game I think that necessarily excels on BGA, although it's perfectly fine adaptation of the game.
Have you seen success using my strategy that I beat you with? Choose Jesus.
Wait, what? What strategy was this?
Oh, were you not there?
Yeah,
I know Neilan was there.
Yeah, maybe
I
he
think
wasn't.
I beat.
No, it was. I think it was you and I and 2 other people actually.
Oh yeah, it's the choose Jesus strategy where you just make a cross and keep going out. It worked. I won.
No.
I don't know why you're laughing.
No, I suspected you were on the Arboretum forums because everybody's talking about that as the broken strategy.
Yeah, that's right. This is a good game. I think it gives me that same vibe of Lost Cities where it's like, if you just discarded it to some random other place, it would be painful, but not that painful. But just the thought that the thought that Mark is going to pick up my card and then smile at me and be like, look what you gave me, you dumbass.
Yeah. Right.
Like takes it up like 10 notches.
Absolutely.
So it's a very painful one.
I also just want to clarify, based on my records here, that you've never beaten me at Arboretum. Although I think we also have never played Arboretum.
No, I think that was the first time Calendar played it, if I'm not mistaken.
I think I had played it before. I think it'd been a long time. But I just remember I just had like the worst Kellen grin on my face at this work. Because the mapping out the tree thing, like where it can wrap around, I'm like, I don't have time for this. So I came up with a new meta and won. So proud of it.
Okay, my number 9 favorite game is down 4 spots. This is perennial favorite, Time's Up. Big love for this throughout the podcast contingent. Time's Up is amazing. I will say that the reason it's slipped down, and I think 4 spots when it comes to my top 10 is a significant jump, is for overplay to some extent. Like I think that we've played a lot of Time's Up over the years. I think that it is, not to say it loses any of its appeal, because I mean it's still an absolutely incredible game. It's still a game I'm sort of absolutely thrilled to have in my top 10. I just kind of found this year that I was sort of less inclined to want to play it. There's been some weird hiccups with the app that we use to play this in person, which has kind of made it harder to play games of this. So yeah, just some minor sort of more social reasons for the fact that Time's Up is down a few spots, but absolutely adore this. This is the game of pseudo charades where you reusing the same word list from round to round to round with rule changes. And the thing that makes that so fantastic is that what makes the game fun is you're inventing the clues that are going to persist from round to round. And those are usually dumb jokes, stupid little things that someone says that just somehow becomes the clue for that. Someone does some sort of bizarre action for the Count of Monte Cristo, and then suddenly everyone's doing a dance every single time that title comes up. It makes no sense in the context of the book itself. But it's just these incredible little in-jokes that sort of naturally emerge over the course of the game. Really, really funny every single time. That's Time's Up.
I think some of the inherent range in party game opinions has to do with whether you're all just trying to have a good time or whether you're trying to like hyper compete and try hard like the shit out of each other. And I think this one works across both axes.
That's for sure.
For people where like with us, it devolves into like the most rules lawyerly, like you said you're not allowed to do that sort of thing. but we know who we're playing it with when we're playing it like that. And then you can have a much more friendly and fun where everyone's just laughing at, the gesturing or the hip thrusting that someone is doing to get you to remember something really random. This one has survived, right, as like a folk game and for a while, so I expect.
Yeah, and for those that haven't heard us rave about it in the past, if you're not familiar with it by the name of Time's Up, then something like Monica's Celebrity, Fishbowl, these are all versions of the same sort of game. There's something specific about the Time's Up rule set that we particularly gravitate to. But yeah.
Number 8.
My 8th favorite game of all time has not moved from last year. This is Marvel Champions, the card game. Again, if you told me years ago that one of my favorite games of all time would be a Marvel game, a solo Marvel game, I guess you can play with more than one player, but I don't think ever play this cooperatively, only solo. I would have not thought that was going to be the case, but here it is. Going back to my variety fetish that Kellen exposed earlier when it came to Age of Steam, I love the fact that there are so many hero packs available for Marvel Champions. For those who are not familiar, you pick a hero to play in the game, and then you pick a villain, and you fight with that hero against a villain. And the thing that I love about the game is that it is a solid game. It's a game that you can play in 45 minutes, so it's not too much of a time bind. But the different heroes you can play quite a bit differently. And I grew up reading comics and knowing comic characters. I've since fallen out of very strong connection with that culture, that hobby. But I still know the characters. I still have a sense of what they are for the most part, except for the few that I've never heard of that I play with. But you have the Iron Man is a character where you're trying to build up the suit. So you start weak and you get stronger. You have characters like the Hulk who are going to be like just powerful from the get-go, but are limited in other factors. And so each character gives you different things to consider in terms of how to play them. Each villain gives you things to consider in terms of the best ways to beat them. And so the combinations make for interesting plays and interesting decisions each time. And now there are so many heroes out there. Some of them are misses. Like some of them I found very, very enjoyable, but they have very silly characters like Spider-Ham and all this stuff and that silliness manifests in the way that you play it. And I think that's just, again, even if they don't hit all the time, it is a novel, interesting way to sort of like add variety that doesn't feel like tacked on or it feels like it's ingrained in how the way the game is actually played. So yeah, I like the idea that I can pick a different villain, pick a different hero, and just have I can't really go in there thinking, okay, this is the way to play Marvel Champions well. I have to consider the hero, I have to consider the villain, and I have to add those both up in terms and then figure out how to play it. I also like the way that the hero's alter ego is in the game. So you have your secret identity and your alter ego or whatever, and you will switch from one to the other, and that'll be a way to sort of rest up. And when you're, Peter Parker as opposed to Spider-Man, you get certain benefits that you don't get as Spider-Man. So it's just a cool way to incorporate that comic book trope into the game. So yeah, Marvel Champions, my 8th favorite game of all time.
This is really high up on my shelf of shame. I've had it for like a little while now, and I think even before I think you sort of were raving about it last year, I sort of just had it sitting around and never got around to playing it. And like every time you talk about it, I feel like I've got to break it out and get going, because I love everything about what you're describing. The way that they seem to be injecting like theme into their decks just seems like really, really fun. I love that. Like sort of very fun, like thematic, mechanical, like touchstones are just something I always appreciate. So yeah, I got to check this out sometime for sure.
And again, it's a super solid game, but it's like simple and not simple like trivial, but you're not going to have to worry about things being over. It's like I'm not in Mr. President sort of deal where there's like tons of different things. It's just like a couple decks of cards and you're good to go.
Cool.
Alas, it's a co-op game.
No, but I'm saying I only play it solo. I would not play this co-op.
That's better.
You made it worse.
Okay, my number 8 is up one spot. This is the Oracle of Delphi. This is my favorite Stefan Feld game. I think I've said it now multiple times over various points about different games. Like race game mechanics are a very great way to sort of front load what is fun about a game. Like if you can say to someone, the objective of this game is to get here, do these things, get back before anyone else. That's easy. I love that you already have people engaged right off the bat. The thing that's really neat about Oracles of Delphi is it's kind of the sort of 12 tasks kind of theme where you have to sort of roam around the board, completing these 12 objectives and getting back to the start.
12 tasks?
Like that's like Greek myth, like 12 tasks of, is it Hercules? I forget who.
Yes.
The labors of Hercules.
Labors of Hercules, yeah.
But they are a series of tasks.
Yeah.
I would have known it if you said the 12 labors.
Sorry, my bad. So you have to go around completing these 12 labors and then get back to the start. And yeah, the fact that you sort of are right from the get-go presented with, here are 12 things you have to do, go and do them in any order. And the game is entirely about two things: optimizing that route, looking at the random map you've created and optimizing a route through them, and then dealing with the various amounts of luck that you're going to be on your side or not, because the actions you can take are dictated by dice you roll at the start of your turn or at the end of your previous turn. But you have multiple ways to mitigate and utilize those dice rolls. Like, every die can either be used for movement or for completing a task and so on, and you have various currencies you can use in order to change the values or modify those values, and spending that and accumulating that in the right quantities is the path to victory in this game. Like, don't rely on the luck. Use it in a way that gets your path, your optimal path, as honed as possible. But then intermixed with that, it's a very interactive game, because these tasks are not completed in isolation. You're racing for them and competing them from other players. You might be rushing to one side of the map and someone gets there and takes the item you need right before you do, and suddenly you have to pivot to like something else that might change your entire game plan. It's very dynamic. It's very, very tense. I love the emergent ways it unfolds over the course of the game. Adore this. That is the Oracle of Delphi.
It's been too long since I've played this. I haven't played this in quite a while. And
I was trying to decide if I had a Stefan Feld game I liked less than Oracle of Delphi, and I arrived at the Castles of Tuscany and La Isla. But other than that, like, this is so low for me. I'm not sure what it is.
Wait, what? That you like less than this? This is your second least favorite Stefan Feld game. That's crazy.
You've got Castles of Burgundy, you got Bruges, you got Carpe Diem, you got Notre Dame, you've got Macau. All are substantially better. Apparently he contributed to La Granja, which I'm like, what the did he do with La Granja? He must have done some random ass.
The colors.
Yeah. Strasbourg, way better. Like, double good. Coco Pelli, remember that?
Yeah.
Card game? Great. Anyway, and then we could go through the re-implementations, because all of those games have a new stupid city name, and all of those games are also better than Oracle.
Interesting. I will say this. I definitely think that my opinion on Feld games is pretty flipped from most people's. The only two I have on my list are In the Year of the Dragon and Oracle of Delphi. No one talks about those as their favorite Feld game.
I agree with that.
So I recognize I'm in the minority here. But yeah.
No, I think the novelty of it being a Euro game, but it's actually a race and you're really rushing around this board, like, that's cool. Like, there, you can't get away from how unique that actually feels when you set up the game and you look at how you're sort of traversing the board or whatever. I don't have a fondness for race as a mechanism as you do. In fact, I feel like, I don't know, maybe traumatized by having to run the school mile as like an 8th grader or something. Like, I don't know, Mark, is a race game, you're like, ooh, a race game? Or are you like, why are we playing a race game?
No, I like race games because I think it makes the victory clear.
Yeah.
That's one thing I appreciate.
Sure.
Also that, but I think it just adds a very immediate tension, right? Like, especially to a Euro game. Like, a Euro game is very often, let's tally our points at the end and see who won.
Yeah.
But like, you're not like, oh man, I'm like this close from being able to clinch it, 2 turns before the end. And this like sort of marries both of those worlds, I think, in a way that I like.
Yep, that's cool. And at least it doesn't do the scythe, which is like, it's a race, but then actually we're going to score it like a Euro at the end.
Exactly.
Yeah, both. Number 7.
All right, my 7th favorite game of all time is down 4 spots. This is from the designer of Chicken Cha-Cha, Klaus Zock. This is The Estates. I did not know until just now that he actually was the designer of Chicken Cha-Cha, which is a kids memorization game. But anyhow, we're not talking about Chicken Cha-Cha. We're talking about The Estates. Estates is another very, very brutal game. There are a few games that when I think of them, a specific feeling or memory or, something very clear. There's a burned in something that comes up when I think about them. And for me, The Estates is the game that gets my heart beating the hardest. I can think of multiple times playing The Estates where it came to my turn and I'm making a decision on what to put up for auction, or maybe I'm in the middle of the auction and what to bid, where my heart is just pounding and I just can feel it thumping my chest, because the Estates is a game where you are bidding for different cubes to build on one of 3 rows, and the big thing is that any of the 3 rows that are not complete at the end of the game, instead of scoring you positive points, will score you negative points. And there are ways to manipulate when a row is considered finished. At the beginning of the game, once there are, I think it's 5 buildings that are built, a row is considered finished. But during the course of the game, you can bid to extend or decrease that number. And for a game that is not high scoring at all, this is a game where you can win with a score of like 1 point or 2 points if things have gone awry, or the game has gone a certain way. It's a game where the winning score, or what it takes to have the winning score, will be dictated by the way that you and your opponents play. Like, you can play a very, very cutthroat game of this where a handful of points will win you the game, or you can play it in a way where people are sort of working together. It's a little more harmonious, and you'll need to score a number of points to win the game. But that can vary greatly from game to game. And even that measure can change mid-game. You can suddenly realize that, I'm working here with Neilan. We're building row 1 together, but all of a sudden Neilan has now placed a building in row 2. What's he after? Like, is he trying to score both of these? I thought we had something going, and suddenly the game can go from being relatively cordial to now super cutthroat. It's also a closed economy, which I love. Whenever an auction is resolved, the money will be flowing through the system, but money never comes into the system. It can only go out of the system. And so those auctions can be really, really, really impactful. And you can find yourself in situations where if you're low on money in the game, you feel completely powerless. When you're there and you're looking across and Christina has a stack of like 15 bills and you've got 2, and you're like, oh my God, I'm just like at the mercy of whatever she wants to do in these auctions until I can somehow come up with more money. Or conversely, when you have the big stack, you feel like, okay, I've got to push people around here. Like, I've got the money here. I've got to really take advantage of it. And so it's just a game, again, like Arboretum. It's a game where every time it comes around to you, you feel like, okay, I've got to make the right decision here, because everything can be so impactful. Another game with a relatively small rule set that's pretty straightforward. All those rules sort of get out of the way, but can lead to some like really, really wild experiences. I remember we played a game of this together where I think none of the rows got fully built, and I ended up winning, I think, with $2 or something like that. So you can have really crazy games of the Estates. So my number 7 game of all time, the Estates.
Your mentioning Chicken Cha-Cha-Cha sent me down the rabbit hole of looking at the rest of Klaus Sock's work. He seems to do like almost entirely children's games.
Yeah, I know, it's great.
Like, the Estates is like his one breakout economic game. It's like, okay.
Yeah, it's weird.
Well, because he did Bausac, right?
Yeah.
Which is a popular dexterity game that also uses like weird shapes, kind of like the tops. Like Neuhamat and Bandu share shapes. So like he just really liked the shapes. Neuhamat being the like
predecessor
original version of the Estates. Yeah. I mean, it's the same game, but
yeah.
I think that these games are fun for our group because when we can all tear each other down, we absolutely will. Like, there's no real shared anything, you know what I mean? And so the scores probably will trend towards that barely anything, which is kind of hilarious.
But in games where we play this, those like feelings are so amped up that I feel like we start out being like at each other's throat, like there will be no alliances, and then when an alliance is sort of formed, you're like, okay, Kellen, me and you are doing this, like me and you are doing this, let's just take Neilan down and like figure the rest out later. And it feels so strong, like those bonds feel so strong, and then one turn, and then all of a sudden everything's broken. Like there's no trust anymore. Like everything has collapsed. So you just get really intense, passionate feelings and moments when you're playing these dates.
Absolutely.
My 7th favorite game of all time is a double crossover with Mark from a couple of episodes ago. This is Pictomania. Kellen mentioned this tension between the ultra competitive and extremely silly side of party games, and I think Pictomania like exemplifies that. Mark and I play this extremely competitively, but it is quite a silly game. Like the premise is you are drawing and guessing at the same time. It's Pictionary, but everything happens simultaneously, and it gets really, really intense. It stresses a lot of people right out, but I love it. Like that crazy manic pressure of trying to get a perfect drawing done in 10 seconds and then quickly rushing to look at everyone's board, get your guesses in before anyone else does, snatching pieces before other people do because everything's happening in real time. I love it. I love everything about it. It's such a great party game. It is my favorite party game. It just doesn't ever get old for me. And I sort of grant that this has come up from like a lifetime of having played games like Pictionary throughout my life, but Pictomania is like it in its like perfect form.
We should play this at Dice Tower West. I don't know what.
Yes, we absolutely should do that. Yeah,
that'd be a perfect
absolutely.
game at Dice Tower West.
The second edition in the smallest box was contentious for a while, but I've come around on it. I think it's worthwhile just to get it in a smaller form factor. I definitely think that the first edition was just too big of a production for like the sort of game it is, but still really good, even in the smaller form factor. Great game.
Number 6.
Number 6 for me is up a spot, and it is a double crossover with Neilan in this very episode. This is Time's Up. This is my favorite party game of all time.
And how dare you for thinking Pictomania was better, Neilan,
sorry.
Time's Up.
I mean, maybe
you?
last year me may have thought that, but I'm an evolved new person in 2025.
Yeah, you're regressing now that you're over the hill.
I will say, I know Neilan mentioned that he felt a little bit burnt out on Time's Up. I had the opposite experience this year. I introduced Time's Up to a number of family members and friends, and we played it in the less by-the-book strict rules than the four of us generally play it. And it was just such a blast. None of the people who I'd played it with had ever played like any of the predecessors, like Salad Bowl or Celebrities, whatever. So they came into these games fresh, and immediately a number of them picked up copies of Time's Up. It's just such a fun laughter and like you'll never play a game of Time's Up where people are not laughing. And whenever we've played this, those introductory games aside, like Dice Tower West, I already know in advance. I know today that one of the highlights of Dice Tower West will be our games of Time's Up. It's not going to be a bad experience. It's going to be fun. And so like I'm already looking forward to like having everybody around sitting on the couch and taking their turns standing up and people telling their teammates to pay attention and getting excited and, you know, screaming and remembering what that dance means and what this putting your finger on your nose means. Like I just know that that'll be a fun experience. So Time's Up always leads to laughter and in-jokes that last past the game, and just everything that you want from the social side of board gaming, I think, is in Time's Up. So Time's Up, fantastic. My 6th favorite game of all time.
So Mark, you're not playing this with the app when you're playing it, right? You're playing it with the box?
Yes, yeah. We're just playing it. We're either like writing down things or we're playing it. I've had enough people who I've played it with now enjoy it so much that they bought the latest edition, so the car's a little more up to date. Like the edition that I had movies and stuff from like the 80s and stuff, and sometimes that is, you know, people don't get the references, but yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I wonder the newest edition what the cards it even has in. Like, did it blend Title Recall? Because Time's Up Title Recall was always the one we would sort of cite.
Yeah.
But it'd be kind of interesting to look at the latest SKU of like because there's like an anniversary edition or whatever, and like see what's on those cards.
It's interesting. I'm looking at that right now, and it seems like the 21st anniversary edition like only has like names of people in it. So
there's also a family edition that I've played that has more like generic things in it. That is, you know, just a little simpler. There's not so much pop culture in it.
Cool. No, that's great. I feel like there's a world where this could turn back for me, not necessarily versus Pictomania. Let's not get crazy. But yeah, I think I like with a lot of these games, like I'm one game away from like being back on board, of course. But yeah, I think the loss of the app has been hitting the local Time's Up scene pretty hard.
We got a fun development.
Exactly. We had to get Dan on
use
the new
podcast to get an app.
Exactly.
Hey.
Okay, my 6th favorite game is up 2 spots. This is The Search for Planet X. And this has been a particularly interesting year for it because not only have we had the more recent Search for Lost Species, which, you know, I like, but not as much as Planet X, but a newer version, a new spin-off, I should say, came out this year called The Search for UAPs. I have not played that yet, but like suddenly this search for games are becoming like a whole franchise unto itself. But Planet X, I think, has a very elegant simplicity to it that doesn't sort of layer on sort of overly complicated mechanics or anything like that. It's a fair bit easier to explain from what I can tell than the other two, having read the rules for UAPs. But it still just sort of presents like with such a pitch perfect puzzle every single time. It is on the surface a quite solitary experience in that you are solving the puzzle on your own, but they are very, very smart about adding really clever interaction that you often don't get in this sort of deduction game. And the main way that manifests is through this publishing idea, where as you're learning the locations of the various heavy bodies, you are tasked with sort of putting that information out in order to score points. But by doing that, you're giving other people information when those points get revealed. So there's this interesting dynamic of, do I give someone like low hanging fruit but get a few number of points for it, or do I give everyone something really, really juicy but get a lot of points for doing that? And that just kind of like seeds this very dynamic table where not only are you coming up with the deductions on your own, but you're benefiting off of the learnings of other people for other sections of the board. And the final puzzle of just putting it all together and solving where everything is, I just find very immensely satisfying. But that is The Search for Planet X. And also, I should note that this game has a time track, which is going to get Mark.
I need to say something here, because just in you discussing this game, I just looked it up on my collections on my BGG profile, and the day this episode is released will be the 2-year anniversary of me owning this game, and I've still not played it once.
Wow.
And now you're mentioning time tracks, so my solemn promise to you, Neilan, is that by the time this episode comes out, I will have played Search for Planet X.
That is very
That
bold.
is a promise. That is a promise.
Because I was going to say we should just
commitment.
play this in Vegas, but yeah, no, I think that I like that more. Get it played in the next 3 days?
3 days. I can do it in 3. I can definitely get it done. Yeah. Look, I was interested in this game enough to pick it up, but my concern, I guess, was, or what always sort of like pulls me back from suggesting it at a game night, is that I'm a little worried, and at this point I've sort of forgotten the rule. At one point I learned the rules for a game night, and now I've sort of forgotten the rules. But I would always fear that it's going to be a little too dry, a little too sort of like sleuthy, for lack of a better term, sort of like deduction heavy to appeal to people. But I don't think, based on what you've sort of said, I don't think that's what it is. I think there's enough game there that it's not just like hey, you need to be good at deduction strictly to have fun with this.
I would agree with that to an extent. Like, I definitely think the people that are going to be better at deduction are still going to be the people that do best at this. But I will say that there are elements that, the time track does introduce an aspect of, okay, how do I efficiently utilize actions in order to get information? That's kind of the main mechanic. Like, do I advance 5 spaces and risk other people taking multiple turns before it gets back to me in order to get a big amount of stuff? Like, that's the other layer to this, is that you can get really, really juicy stuff if you're willing to spend the time to get it.
I love this. Yeah.
And then that's also factored into your position around the board, which is the time track, determines what you're allowed to observe and study. So you have to like time that out in quite the right way to get the information where you need it. So there's a lot of very clever considerations there that are separate from the pure, okay, if this is here and this is here, that means that there must be something here. Like it does it all kind of, honestly, in a very quite nicely presented, relatively simple to learn package as well.
Don't you think you sort of like deduced everything that could be deduced in like a weight 2 deduction game?
No, not really. Honestly, not really. I even like, I guess like the thing I would say is, it's a little bit like, and this is not going to be a favorable Kellen comparison, I suppose, but like you can do 1,000 Sudokus and not get tired of like that puzzle solving thing. Like, because there's fun, there's enough variability to it that the fun little twists and being like, oh, I see how this one is slightly different. There are enough little twists to the formula that make it feel a bit different from time to time.
Cool. Number 5.
My number 5 is another inter-episode crossover with Neilan. This is Brass. He went with Birmingham. I'm going to go with Lancashire, but you can't go wrong either way. I won't talk about this too long because Neilan's already done a great review of it, but just so many great things to love about Brass. A couple things that he didn't mention, just minor things that I love about it. I have really, just in my life, moved away from, for lack of a better term, like hard to see media, like dark. Like I don't like dark movies. I don't like dark TV shows, like where everything's muddled and you can't really see what's going on. And Brass is a game that is very dark as well, but for some reason it totally works. Like there was a game called like Ishatan or something, which was like a very dark
Yeah.
I didn't even. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
It's that Risk game, Eschaton. Yeah.
Yeah,
The white on black aesthetic.
yeah, and I had it, and I was like excited. I'd heard good things about it, but then I opened it up and I started reading the rules, and it was just so dark. And not even in terms of like the theme was dark also, but it was everything was like, again, very shades of like black and dark and muddled. Sure, that I sort of traded it away because I just couldn't get
Kids
myself
aren't
to
allowed
play.
to even read Harry Potter. Don't even look at it.
But all this to say that the black, dark board and theme and color palette of Brass completely works for me. I think it's done wonderfully. Maybe the theme is part of it. The whole coal mining thing is a part of it. And the other thing that I love about Brass is the way that, and this is a super minor thing, but just something that jumps out for me with Brass is the way that turn order is figured out every round, because turn order is huge in Brass, and the way you decide who goes first is the person who spent the least money in the previous round. And that always just struck me as a very cool way to determine it, because like you can have a big round where you spend a lot of money, but you do that at the cost of initiative in the next round. I've always loved that way to like interlock these two aspects of the game, like big turns, taking good actions, yet you're giving up initiative. Just love that. And there's just so much to love about Brass. The way that, again, Neil talked about this, but the shared infrastructure, I think, a lot of games do it. I don't know if any game has done it as good as Brass or as like fresh as Brass. So I love it.
There's also something I didn't mention earlier that I also like a lot about Brass, which is that it is, for a game that is as heavily strategic as it is, the element of tactical nature to the fact that you are somewhat limited, quite limited actually, round to round by the cards you get, is fascinating to me. It kind of throws that very heavily deterministic economic game out the window, where it's like, okay, how do I make this hand of card work within my overall strategy? Great twist on that, the type of heavy economic game. My fifth favorite game of all time is Alchemists, another deduction game. This is my favorite deduction game, and honestly for similar-ish reasons to Search for Planet X, is that like this is honestly a lot of the time I bounce off of pure deduction games, stuff like Sleuth, like Mark was mentioning, but the thing that makes Alchemists work for me is similar to what I like about Planet X, is that it has a lot of really well-defined systems all rolled into one game, of which the deduction is a very big part of it. Like this is, I would say, still primarily a deduction game, but it's also an excellent worker placement game. The way that you bid for turn order is so vital in Alchemists, because like you are acquiring ingredients that you use to brew potions that you then have to test in order to figure out what those ingredients are. But if you can't get those ingredients because you didn't go early enough in the turn order, if you can't sell your potions because all the customers have been sold to you by the time you get there because you didn't go early enough, these are very harsh decisions that are entirely outside of the realm of the deduction game. And I think that they work really, really well. That turn order bidding, that worker placement, how are you going to utilize the few actions you have in every turn when you have to do all of getting ingredients, making potions, selling potions, publishing papers about your findings. You want to do all of these things, and yet you have very limited actions to do them in. That is a great game unto itself, but it is bolted onto what I think is, to some extent, a more rudimentary deduction puzzle, like a more complex puzzle, but more like by the numbers than what I was describing in Planet X. Like once you learn the complexities and the nuances of Alchemist's deduction system, there's not necessarily a whole lot of variance and nuance to applying it, but it's still a fun sequence of events to work through while you're grappling with the rest of the game, which is how do I best utilize the information? Knowing what I know about the deduction system, do I go heavily on getting these ingredients? Do I go heavily on publishing early? Do I go heavily on these items? Learning that deduction system is going to be the bulk of your first few games, but once you grapple with it, the whole rest of the game opens up in like really strategic ways, where that's now just almost like the mechanic that feeds the rest of the great strategic decisions in Alchemists. I love the theme on this. It's a very silly take on academia, where you can publish theories, but are they actually real? Are they real results that you found? That's up for someone else to figure out. As long as you get the publishing money, it doesn't really matter until someone calls you out for it, you know? It's a fun twist on what it could be a very sort of neat contemporary topic, but they put this very silly wizard aesthetic over the top of it. It just gives it a very Discworld vibe, which I quite like a lot. Yeah, very silly, very funny, but ultimately quite deep strategic worker placement deduction game, Alchemists.
Number 4.
My fourth favorite game of all time is up a couple of spots, 2 spots from last year. This is the Friedman Friese Fresh Fish. So to sort of keep with a theme that is going to be throughout my top 10, save for a couple notable exceptions like Time's Up, another game that is pure stress. This is not really the greatest selling point for people listening to this, but if you want these like high tension moments, my list is chock full of them. And so Fresh Fish is a game, again, high stress but silly theme. You are trying to serve the freshest foods to people at a fair, and the way you're doing that is by having your stalls, trying to get your stalls as close to the sources of ice cream and cheese and fish and soda as possible. So you want to be as close to it as possible. This is a lowest score wins thing where your score will be based on how many steps you are away from the source. So if you're 2 steps away from the fish source, that's 2 points, and you want to be as low as possible. But the tension comes in the fact that in order to place a stall out, you need to sort of claim a spot. So you need to first claim a spot and then place the stall out. But there are, through a number of different functions, there are ways that your claims you've placed can be upended, either by you drawing a tile that you don't want to draw, or by your opponents bumping you out. There's a lot of like staking out prime real estate and then just having your opponent place something in a way that your claims have been, kicked off. There's also, which is like, again, the heart of the game and where the tension comes up, is in these auctions. The auctions, because you're only fighting for sort of 4 scorings, these 4 different stalls you're placing out. So you only have 4 sources of points. The auctions for the stalls are pretty significant, and the way that the auctions are resolved is by a blind bid. And so blind bidding, I know, is a source of like tension and maybe some people are not big fans of it, but there's that sort of thinking, like trying to get into the minds of your opponents, how high is Callan going to go on this? Can I get away with winning this auction for 4 coins, or am I going to need to push it? But if I push it and now I bid 6 and nobody else has bid anything, I'm going to feel like an idiot. So what do I need to do? And this is another closed economy game where, again, money just goes out of the system, and the money that you start with to make these bids, that is like consequential, points of the game, you're never going to get more of it. It's only going to be going out. And so another game where it's behind a silly theme. And in a lot of ways, it has that route blocking thing, because aside from the stalls you're putting out, you can also place these benches that block your opponent's way. So it's in a way a route building, route disruption game, which I enjoy a great deal. Yeah, Friese and Wallace, I've talked about them before being 2 like similar designers insofar as like every time they release something, or often when they release something, they feel quite fresh. They feel like they're games that are built sort of from zero, and they don't seem most of the time built based on like current trends or previous designs. They just feel like every game from the 2 designers feels like a new exploration in what board games can do. And a lot of times they will not succeed, but I think when they work, you get this very fresh, unlike anything else experience. And I think in Brass, in Fresh Fish, feel like unlike other games. And when these designers are, at their peak, it doesn't really get much better, I think, than the best of Wallace or Friese. So my 4th favorite game of all time is Fresh Fish.
Yeah, I was reminded about this yesterday or the day before, I forget, when we were playing Arango, which is like superficially and mechanically similar in some ways, like that bidding, route building, trying to claim space. And I just was reminded by how much I adored that game of Fresh Fish. Was still the only time I played it, I think, or maybe I played it a couple of times, but around the same period. I need to play this more. Like this is one that just sits in the back of my brain as a game I remember adoring and need to play more of. My number 4 favorite game is Sidereal Confluence, trading and negotiation in the Elysian Quadrant.
Not anymore, bro.
Not anymore, apparently. Yeah, it's a bummer, because I think with the remastered...
Why does everything get ruined?
I know. But with the remastered version, it is now simply Sidereal Confluence, and it is a bummer because the remastered version is a much better production overall. Has a cool cover now, has some great art, cleaned up UI. Sidereal Confluence is a amazing game about trading and negotiation. You can play this up to
Where
in the Elysian Quadrant specifically. Oh, okay. Don't get confused with those other trading and negotiation games. Like, yeah, if it doesn't say Elysian Quadrant on the box, it's not Sidereal Confluence. But yeah.
But you don't like talking to people.
Oh, but What? Hey, I was gonna like almost be like, but no, but wait, what? Of course I like talking to people. And I especially like it in the
know,
context of space trading. Like, if you're building a space empire, and I can sort of pretend to be sort of negotiating like trade agreements with the which are one of the races.
You want every business transaction to hand you a little chart of how valuable everything is that you might talk about in this conversation. That's the secret to my negotiation tactics. It's like, well, this chart here says that actually you owe me one more small cube. But, like, I think that is one of the things I think that is quite neat about the game is it kind of tells you, hey, here's fair market price for everything. But it's not always that simple, because one green cube to me is worth potentially a lot more than one green cube to Mark, depending on what your economy runs on. So you have to be factoring that in if you're playing Siderial Confluence well. Like, don't give Mark all your green cubes. You know what Mark can do with green cubes. I will get you a better deal on your green cubes.
I'm unstoppable with green cubes. And also my economy runs on hope.
Fantastic. That is, that's powerful. But it's like there's so much like wheeling and dealing you're doing in this game. Like, hey, I know you can't do anything with those green cubes, but I can. So how about I take them from you, I'll run them, I'll convert them into something and give you back a little bit something along the way. It makes sure that all promises are binding, so it's always quite friendly. It sort of ensures that like you never are really going to feel super bad about any negotiation that's happening. But if you're doing the better deals, if you're getting the things that are doing slightly more for you than they're doing for the other person, and your economy is floating in exactly the right ways, that's beneficial to kind of the board as a whole, because a strong economy in Siderial Confluence is one that kind of supports other players, because that's just the nature of the game. That's when you're going to be doing well. So it's a very different take on that style of negotiation game. You're not trying to always screw someone over. You're just trying to help them a little bit less than you're helping yourself. And that, I think, is novel. Like, it's a game that plays maybe not as quickly, but nearly as quickly with 9 players as it does with 4, which is sort of a feat in of itself. It's almost entirely simultaneous. And there are just few games that can support that scale and that breadth and that player count without feeling like it's completely buckling under its weight. And like, Siderial Confluence gets close, but it still provides like this very clean experience for that many players in a relatively meaty game without just feeling like completely nonsensical at every point. Adore this game. The interaction with the different factions is what makes it as strong as it is. Like, every intermix you have of factions from game to game is going to make it feel very different as people are swapping their wild asymmetries depending on which faction they're playing. Yep, that is Siderial Confluence.
Yeah, I had this obviously as my 29th favorite game of all time, and I just think that the thing about Siderial Confluence, as you mentioned, is like just the fact that you can have this trading game with so many players where trades never feel awful. Unless you're going in completely super try hard or super aggressive, trades always benefit the parties involved to some extent or the other, and it just makes for such a it's still tense, it's still trading, it's still a lot of shouting, but you're always making out on trade. You're always getting better on trade.
Yeah.
It may, again, not be as good as your opponent or the person sitting next to you, but all the trades feel beneficial. And it's just such a interesting way to handle trading. With trading games, you always feel like you're either on the winning end or the losing end. And Sidereal, while there is incremental aspects of that, it's just so great that you're always getting something that you could use whenever you trade.
For sure.
Number 3.
Number 3 for me is new to the list, although it was on my list, I think, years and years ago. But this is a game that has skyrocketed up the ranks for me because of its appearance on BGA. It's been on BGA now for a little while, but I've really, really fallen down the rabbit hole with this. And it is a game that I'm happy to have on the list because it is our namesake, Barrage. Barrage is my 3rd favorite game of all time. When I first played Barrage, I liked it. I enjoyed it because it's not so much like Fresh Fish or Brass. Like, it's not that revolutionary as a whole, but it is a interesting economic worker placement, area control sort of thing. All that stuff wrapped into one, done in a fresh way. But I didn't really appreciate how nuanced the gameplay can be and the sort of like different paths to victory and how on your toes you need to be in playing Barrage. An aspect of it that I didn't really appreciate and I sort of thought as an afterthought that I now appreciate as like central to the game is the way that, and I think Terra Mystica does this too, and the Terra Mystica family of games, where every round a certain type of building is going to be scored, or a certain aspect of the game is going to be scored. And I used to think that, okay, that's something to think about. Like, I'd see that, okay, power stations are going to be scored in the third round. I'll make sure to try to do that. But in Barrage, if you're playing it with players who have played it for a while at all, considering when to have these scorings or when to like go hard for a round scoring becomes such a pivotal part of the game and changes the way you need to think about the entire arc of the way you're going to play it. And there is whenever you build a building in Barrage, as Terra Mystica does, you're going to take it off of your personal sheet and you're going to place it on the board, and that is going to often reveal an income source. And that aspect of the game was something that I didn't appreciate how important it was, and how, again, you could like have different strategies based on the way that the board is set up, the players you're playing against. There is, as I mentioned, like there's a area control thing where you're sort of fighting for the water that's traveling down these rivers and into different basins. And it is a very, very, very competitive, cutthroat game in that way, because if somebody builds a dam high up on a river, it really feels like you can cut off your supply for water and sources of like ways to score points. It just can feel brutal if you can't pivot. It's a game that is very, very strategic in the way that I described, having to pay attention to the round-to-round scoring, but also extremely tactical, because if somebody cuts off your water supply or builds in a place that you want to build, you need to pivot or you're going to wither away. It's got asymmetry in the types of executive officers they're called in the game, like your special powers, and in the countries that you have, which are basically the income that is revealed is different from country to country, and powers are different from executive officer to executive officer. And the way that those synergize, again, something I did not appreciate in my first couple of plays of Barrage that I've really, really got into playing it on BGA. I'm still not a very good player, but it's just a game that is just so meaty, and there's just so much to consider that I've really appreciated all it has to offer, and just how crunchy the decisions are in the game, while still having that sort of brutality that I like. I just like games where you feel like your decisions mean a lot. You see that in Barrage, but with the ability to, if you're on your toes, if you've been thinking about it, to tactically pivot. Just such a deep game that I've appreciated through playing it a number of times on BGA, and has just skyrocketed up my estimation in playing it so often.
I very rarely like to be in this position, but I don't know. I haven't turned the corner on Barrage yet.
Yeah.
It's something I struggle with, because I recognize things in it that I recognize in games I like a lot. Like the specifics of, hey, here is your grand strategy until Mark comes along and just like sticks a knife in your gut, and suddenly your entire game is ruined and you have to sit for 2 hours and watch Mark win while your dams are like trickling water out of cracks in them. Is like very demoralizing. And that's been my experience both times playing Barrage, where I was beaten by basically just being blocked and being unable to recover, and that was very frustrating. But like I see in other games like, Food Chain Magnate, like there are times where that's also true, but I don't see it as much of a problem in those. And I think maybe because of those games often allow you to then turn the corner and come back in a very strong way. And I feel like Barrage is always just one twist from you just feeling you're out of it completely. And for a game that's that heavy and that's long, I find that really hard to navigate personally. But I owe it another chance. I can see myself getting there, but I find it hard to bring myself to want to.
And I completely get that 100%. I will say that after you obviously giving it a chance, playing it a couple times is asking a lot of the player. But I will say that if you play it a lot, I think it's a game that is not quite as cutthroat as it appears to be. Like, if you're choked off of the water supply, that feels terrible, but it's actually really not necessarily as bad as you think, because you can score so much building buildings or building the different structures that it's often like a better way to score, like building infrastructure, because you're getting the income off your boards, and for a lot of the income it's like victory points. So like you can forego water completely, honestly, and forgo the whole thing and just build, and along with that building strategy you can focus on scoring the different building types for the round. So even if you're blocked off of the water supply, I think it allows for different paths that might not have like felt viable. Like if you feel like if you're choked out of the flow of water, the obvious clear things to think like, oh, I'm done. But there's actually ways around it that, again, I did not understand, but now appreciated with multiple plays. And it's also called Barrage, so we should have it on the list.
My third favorite game of all time is down one spot. This is A Feast for Odin. This is very much a kitchen sink game, but in a kind of lovely way. It is a Euro game with a massive, massive worker placement board. And while to a lot of people that might be anathema when it comes to worker placement, what it maybe loses in that very sort of very tight, quite restrictive style of worker placement that's more, akin to something like perhaps an Agricola, it makes up for in just allowing you to pursue so many different routes through this board. There are so many different mechanisms that are baked into all the different actions you can take, and they sort of follow just different thematic routes, and not just thematic, but mechanical routes. So you're going to sort of be the person that's acquiring tiles and flipping them by trade, or you're going to be the person that's sort of getting livestock and turning that into valuable products. Like, are you going to be the whaler or the huntsman? Like, there are just so many different routes to take, and all of them feel satisfying in different ways. They sort of tickle different parts of my brain. And in every game, I sort of both want to try something completely wholly different, but stick to the tried and true methodologies. Like it mixes both of those urges of like wanting to do the thing that I sort of know is going to pay off very well, but rewarding you for sort of taking a route because maybe someone is also trying to cut you off, down the whaling route. It marries all of that with this very satisfying polyomino puzzle where ultimately everything you're doing is about turning tiles into other tiles to place them onto your board in order to feed your income, grow your points, all of that jazz. I've spoken a lot about Feast for Odin. It used to be my favorite game. It's just slipped down one spot this year. But I absolutely adore it. It is just sort of one of the most comfort food board games I know, which sounds kind of crazy given like how unwieldy and how relatively heavy a game it is. But it's one where anytime I'm in it, I just kind of feel like so cozy and in my element of sort of picking up and manipulating polyominoes, turning them into others, and navigating my way through Viking life, I guess. But yeah, that's A Feast for Odin.
I know you've talked about this before, and I've played Feast for Odin, both the base and the Norwegians expansion. The base way more than Norwegians, and I forget. I know it's sort of like just a 2.0 version, but how much, in your opinion, does Norwegians add to the base game?
If you dislike A Feast for Odin, it's not going to change the game for you.
Yeah.
I've dismissively called it a patch in the past, but I think for my money, it's an essential expansion, which is to say I would never choose to play it without Norwegians ever again. I also don't think it bolts on enough that it like completely, it's not a game where suddenly you add the expansion and it's a completely radically different game. It does feel like it's rebalancing, enhancing, making very, very smart additions. And namely what that does is, rebalancing a bunch of spots. It changes the whole worker placement board. It does also make it slightly tighter. It adds some more very interesting elements of interaction to that board that I think are a slight improvement while not sort of entirely negating that sort of very wide open sandbox structure of it. Yeah, I think it's just a strict improvement personally, but I also wouldn't say to someone like, hey, if you're going to buy A Feast for Odin, you have to buy Norwegian immediately. Play a few games of A Feast for Odin, and if you love it, then by all means, I would highly recommend you transition to Norwegians as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I've always enjoyed Feast for Odin, but I haven't loved it, and I wonder if I can go from liking to loving going from base to Norwegians. I also think my playstyle is probably not helping things. I tend to just try to focus on a path, or whenever I've played it the sort of the same way, focusing on the same things and trying to just like plumb the depths of like a hunting strategy or a whaling strategy. I forget which ones that I've dabbled in, but I think playing it a little more exploratory maybe would help it out. I've been playing it so min-maxy that I think maybe I haven't enjoyed it because of that, but I've never had a bad game of it. It just hasn't risen for me.
I do think that Norwegians could possibly elevated in that sense because it does force you to be a little bit more reactionary because of the slight tightening of the board. So you can't just unilaterally be like, hey, this is the one thing I'm going to do and sticking with it.
Yeah.
It changes the board in interesting ways that kind of make it a little bit more dynamic that I think you'd enjoy.
I think I would like that a lot. I know we've all played it together with Norwegians. I just been so long, and I've played it a number of times without Norwegian since then that I've forgotten what it has to offer. And I think a tightening would really raise it in my estimation. So I got to give it a shot.
That is A Feast for Odin at number 3.
Number 2.
We're going to stay with Uwe. We're going to go with his magnum opus. It hasn't moved for me. Agricola is still my number 2 game of all time. This actually dovetails quite a bit with Barrage. With Barrage, I didn't really understand the importance of seeing the different round scoring, and understanding that has raised it in my estimation so much. With Agricola, the card draft at the beginning of the game, where you're drafting your occupations and your improvements, I thought it was like a fun thing that gave it variety. And I know people have argued that the game is the card draft, and I get that as a complaint, that like you're sort of beholden to whatever cards you draft, and that's true to some extent. But I love the fact that in the draft, as you're drafting the occupations and the improvements, it's like you're trying to flesh out, okay, how do these cards combo? What does it mean I need to do? What does it mean with these cards I've drafted? What is my ideal situation? Okay, if my ideal situation doesn't work, what do I just have to make sure that I do? Because Agricola is like, for a worker placement game, it is incredibly interactive in that way of just like denying your opponent's spots, because, it's a game that feels big, maybe not as big as Feast for Odin, but if, you have all these pieces and you have all these worker placement spots, and it's like 15 rounds long, but 15 rounds in Agricola goes way faster than you sort of expect, at least for me whenever I play it, because I have these grand plans of how cards are going to combo, but once a couple spots get filled up early and you don't really have much time to get your engine running, you got to figure something out. Like maybe you drafted one card thinking it was going to be the linchpin of your entire strategy, but if you can't get it going, you got to do something else, and it can lead to frustrating plays where you never get things going. But when you can get things to click in Agricola, it just feels so great, because it is such a tough game. Misery Farm is what it's been called, and that's a true thing. Like it is a game that can feel really, really, really rough if you can't get your food engine going, if you can't get your long-term strategy going. I just love it. It's a game that years ago when we first started the podcast, I didn't like, because I kept getting trounced, and to some extent I'm still getting trounced often when I play it, but I just still loved it. I'm still not a great player, but I love that, trying to figure out how to make things work. So my second favorite game of all time, Agricola.
So this also has the sort of lifestyle-y of 12 different decks if you want to use them kind of thing that you like in Age of Steam, and Barrage has a lot of variants. Well, or is getting more and more, I feel like, as it goes along in that way.
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting flavor.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a plus with Agricola. I don't think you need a bunch of decks, but I think a couple of the decks really does lead to different feeling games. I
feel like with the right group, I would be a casual Agricola lover. And actually, this has been one of my favorite games forever, but it's the people who are who can understand why in the N deck or the L deck or whatever you need to focus on this thing. It's just how many times have you played this game?
Right. Yeah. I mean, high-end Agricola play, super high-end Agricola play is, you just are going to get hammered often, and that still again happens to me, but I just love trying to puzzle out what my potential avenues of scoring are and trying to make it work.
And we must have done it on a previous episode, Mark. Where is Race for the Galaxy in your top 50?
Race for the Galaxy is, oh my gosh, I think I forgot it. Oh,
yeah. Just got to put it on your top 50?
I forgot. I completely forgot to put it on my list.
Funny.
I must have. I know I had it at one point, and I think I just shuffled it. I'm assuming I was going to put it back on and just never put it on.
You hate it now.
Yeah, that's right.
Because I feel like it would be potentially in the top 5, or it has been, or it kind of moved into.
Definitely.
But it's
last year it was 12. I think now it would be.
Oh, it moved into the top 10, then moved out. Okay.
Yeah. I think it would drop a little bit more, honestly, just because I played it so much. But yeah, it would probably.
You should just say that you discovered a way to win every game, and so it's moved off your list.
That's good. Yeah, I'll do that.
Have you, because that's another one where you play the base set, then you had the expansion, then you play the Series B stuff. Have you played a lot of the different stuff?
With Race for the Galaxy? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I would really hesitate to play just base Race for the Galaxy. That it feels like not enough. But I've played all of this, well, not all. I probably played most of the sets, and some of the far out ones are just, I don't think, very good at all. They introduce like a spatial map thing where you're like moving a guy around a board, and
Oh,
just,
dear.
like, that's just doesn't work. It just disjoints the game. But the main branch that everybody says to play, like those first 3 expansions, I think those are great, and those really are, I think, essential to playing it. But yeah.
Cool.
My number 2 favorite game of all time is up 1 spot. This is Blood on the Clocktower. This is a game that I really wasn't sure whether I was going to end up just putting at number 1 this year. And to some extent, I'm surprised I didn't. But we'll get back to that when we get to the number 1. But Blood on the Clocktower, I've had an incredible year of playing. Like I have done a lot more storytelling in the last year as I sort of introduced this to work colleagues and now run a regular bi-weekly game at the office. And it's just been really, really fun seeing it from that completely different perspective of exposing it to a group of all new players and watching their meta evolve and playing with them. And there's something that I just have found so fascinating and rewarding about that experience, which is particularly like in the games where I play with them, seeing how their meta has kind of like completely evolved in parallel in different ways from other groups I play. Like this is a small little thing, and this is, I think, to anyone that's played a lot of Blood on the Clocktower, is not necessarily going to be a thing, but like one of the early game struggles in that, is to use one quick example, is about the demon and the minion sort of communicating their bluffs to one another. The demon gets 3 bluffs as to good characters they can bluff as, and the minions need to sort of know what those bluffs are from the demon. And one thing that I think that my group just started doing very quickly is just like really matter-of-factly just having the demon walk up to their minions, like basically with tapping a sheet, or like very quickly visually signaling that role to their minions incredibly quickly, and watching that happen in a way that always was just this dance, this delicate dance that I've always done, trying to be like, oh, when am I going to talk about this? Let's just find a way to do this. And they just sort of come up striding, like tapping the sheet while no one's looking. And it's just like so brazen. And it's just so cool to like see these little things happen that everyone in the group just accumulated kind of over the course of just playing multiple games. So to the point that when I was thrown into that group, I was just like, I don't know what's happening here. And like that's cool to me. I think that sort of speaks to the strength about what these sort of like big structural games that have these very emergent play styles can introduce. So even though that like you are messing with the same roles in every game of Trouble Brewing, to pick one of the scripts at random, the way that every group approaches it is completely different. Having played more and more custom scripts in the past year as well has kind of sort of elevated the way I think about the game from the perspective of a player, not a storyteller. There is something about that unfamiliarity of not just using the base 3 scripts, of sort of having to navigate your way through all the different worlds that a new custom script presents, and some of the more interesting custom roles, some of the weirder custom demons, that also really like elevates the game in different ways for people that have played this a ton of just using the base scripts. There are just so many different ways I have come to appreciate this game over the course of the past year that it would be silly not to call it my favorite social deduction game, and certainly not just, one of my absolute favorite board game, quote unquote, experiences I've ever had. Like I think this is fantastic. And I think if you have any inclination for social deduction, which I know is going to be something that is going to sort of divide people in the room right out of the gate, but if you have any inclination for social deduction and you have not found a way to try Blood on the Clocktower, I know that can be a big ask depending on your group and the dynamics of your group, but find a way to play this game. It will probably be one of the most interesting, novel, formative social game experiences you will have.
Do you think that when you're storytelling, you're playing Blood on the Clocktower?
I do, actually. And that is actually an interesting point. And I'm glad you brought it up, because that's something I do think is worth talking about. Something I have said in the past, and I think I will sort of reiterate here, is that if all I ever did for Blood on the Clocktower was storytell it, it would still be one of my absolute favorite games. And I know that that's a weird thing to say, because like, are you playing the game at that point? I think yes, absolutely, in as much as you are creating an experience, in as much as, like, say, a dungeon master in D&D is playing the game, you know, like, and that gets weird because it does start to like blur the lines between this as a game and as an experience. But I do think that there is just something about participating in the game that is a role that is very unique to the storyteller, that is quite different from what you would just loosely call a moderator in other similar games. You are, to some extent, interacting and bouncing off and reacting to players in a way that feels very much like you are integrating into the game. Yeah, I think that that's probably maybe a very sort of loosey, airy-fairy way to describe what playing a game even means, but I'm going to stand by it. If that is all I was ever doing, I would still consider this to be one of the best times I've ever had with a game.
And then my second question, have you ever used variant character cards in Resistance before?
No, that's actually interesting. I haven't. I'm aware of their existence. I've just not ever gone to those lengths to introduce them into my games, funnily enough.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how like the act of this game like coming out in these years and then everyone being actively involved in like making new things for it actually helps it, you know, and like it has its own community where like Ultimate Werewolf has like 50 roles in the box, and there's probably really good, here's 8 that go really well together, but like you're actually living in the best era to play Blood on the Clocktower that will probably ever exist, and that's not a knock on it. It's just like an exciting, like people are developing for it and talking about it actively.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that even makes it even more potentially exciting on the horizon is, you know, we have still only had those 3 official scripts, but we are due, I mean, timeline, who can say for something like this, but there are more official scripts and roles coming, you know, in the, I don't want to say near future, but in the future, certainly. So yeah, there is still a evolving landscape for this game ahead of us, which is, you're right, it is the most exciting time to be playing it for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, that is Blood in the Clocktower, my number 2.
And finally, number 1.
All right, no big surprise here. Number 1, still Biblios. Look, it's just, look, do you want drafting? Do you want auctions? Do you want set collection? Do you want hand management? Do you want
2 phases?
2 phases. Look, Brass does 2 phases great, but it doesn't do it as great as Biblios. You get all that stuff in 30 minutes in a small space. You have the Arboretum sort of like Arboretum's whole thing. I love Arboretum, but the whole thing about it being like have enough points in your hand, like of the suit that you want to score. It's got it. Like whatever you want, it has it already, and it's only 30 minutes, and it just has everything. It's great. Every time I play it, I'm always terrified that this is going to be the time that I'm going to play it, and it's not going to be good. That does not happen. It does not happen. Biblios is fantastic. Play Biblios. Just play it, for Christ's sake. Biblios number 1. I said Christ's sake because it's a game about monks. You see that?
I see what you did there. I played Biblios at 2 players for the first time recently and was kind of surprised how much I liked it.
See, Kellen?
Oh, no. At 2 players.
I know. I kind of
it works. It just works. It just works.
It's a good game.
You also recently played For Sale, Neilan, and what's your takeaway?
Yes, I remember this argument of like, well, why play Biblios when For Sale exists?
That's such a terrible argument.
What do you?
I actually think there's something to it. Like I think For Sale is an excellent game, and I think I'm always reminded of that, despite how like simple it is, like how great it is. But there's some
2 phases
there. Yeah, 2 phases.
For Sale is an
2
excellent.
phases.
For Sale is an excellent game, but it's not this. It's not even close to the same thing. It's not.
I mean, it's not as drab, I suppose.
Oh my gosh, this is such a good game, man.
It's like you've single-handedly made Dr. Finn into this mythical status. And like for most people be like, what?
I know.
But not you.
This is it's not a role that I wanted. It's a calling, much like a monk. I was called by Finn, and I've become a disciple. I didn't choose it.
It reminds me of like the classic Arrested Development joke where George Michael is like talking about how beautiful his girlfriend is and how she's so amazing and funny and cute, and then everyone just replies, "Her?" with a question mark. Like, really? Her?
My number 1 first favorite game of all time is still Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization. Yeah, I think that the thing that I was sort of alluding to earlier, where how Blood in the Clocktower could easily be in this spot, but I think that always dissolves anytime I play Through the Ages. And despite the fact that I've now played it as much as I have, and I played a lot of Through the Ages, and despite the fact that it is a long, heavy game, it is still incredible. It is still so intensely rewarding game after game after game. This is still my definitive Civilization board game experience. Even though I've come through this genre, broadly speaking, through the Civilization video game, and this is not really a 4X game like the video game is, it takes enough of what I like about the core of Sid Meier's Civilization and preserves kind of that way that you are driving down through all of these technologies, the way that you are trying to battle out your specific speciality while other people are focusing on their specific specialities, whether that's a culture engine or whether that's military. But you cannot do all of that stuff in a vacuum. Like, you have to be reactive to what every other player is doing. If someone is going hard on military, you will get destroyed by them. If someone has a unassailable culture engine, then you have to try to combat things that way. You have to be sort of dynamic about cutting people off from the technologies they need to best support the infrastructure that they're going for, while playing into the very specific needs of your civilization at any given time, whether that's happiness, science, so on. In a similar way to something like Innovation, which is, not by any small coincidence also civilization themed, if you are not very specifically looking at what your precise need is in a moment and pivoting and sort of saying like, okay, I've been neglecting this for too long, I just need to pivot down this new technology. I've been neglecting my happiness for too long, I need to sort of go down this route. I need to sort of like stop focusing on this one thing and go wholesale down this different route and sort of acquire the cards you need in order to very quickly pivot down that route. You will fall behind, you will fail. And I think the thing is, while it is a harsh game, it is one that does allow you to make those pivots, because the game quite neatly divides into these 3 ages. And you can and should be sort of trying to find the way to correct the mistakes of your previous age when the new age rolls around, and sort of find the way to get the technologies that are going to get you back ahead in the areas that you were lacking. It sort of layers on top of all of that these sort of incredibly diverse leaders and wonders that give you just little boons and benefits. But the hero of the whole thing really is that card acquisition, that card row, and sort of the timing of using your actions to get cards that you need early before other people can cut you off from them. It's the whole game, and it's vital, and it's magnificent every single time. Yeah, this is one of those games that can be a tough sell for a lot of people. It is quite heavy, it is quite long, it is quite laborious to explain to someone that has not played it before. But once you get over that curve, I think the reward is immense. That is Through the Ages, a new story of civilization.
It's really hard to push back on someone's number one favorite video game, a board game. Did I say it wrong? And then your number 2 game that you don't even play unless we redefine the word play. But I will not make those comments because your enthusiasm is noted. Do you think the card play is particularly like notable in the game, or that there's some fun thing happening with the cards? Because like there kind of has
really.
to be. Then
it's not.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not card play in the way that I think maybe.
Yeah.
I guess I'm sort of almost like negating the question more than anything.
Sure.
Like, I wouldn't describe it as card play, because it's like every card you get is, incremental to some extent. Like,
sure.
In sort of, I would say, direct opposition to something like Innovation. It's not like, wow, this new card just like completely 180 pivots my entire path. Like, it's more about patching holes in what like were very big holes in your infrastructure. It's more about patching those with the essential things that you need. And like those more wilder powers do come through in the course of like the leaders and the wonders, but those are fewer and far between. Like, you're going to get 3 or 4 of each over the course of a game. So it's not like, that's not like as dramatic, but those are where the big swivels can be. But yeah, no, it's not a game of like play a card, do something amazing. It's certainly like just not that.
Yeah. It's something funny about like how it exists as a board game, even though it might be a better video game, but that probably means that Mr. Vlada like willed it into existence, and it kind of also exists at this like you love the Civ video games too, and it's a board game, so there's just like
yeah. Well, totally, but I think the one way I will push back against that a little bit is that this was one of my favorite games before it even existed in digital.
Yeah, and I'm not saying
that's yeah.
I'm saying more like
that
you
love
take
is
a video
purely
game.
built off of the board game.
Yes, no. I'm saying that like it comes from a love of Civilization style video games, like the impetus of the design itself is what I'm saying.
Yes, absolutely. I think that is unquestionably Vlada played Sid Meier's Civilization and adapted it into a board game.
Right.
There's zero doubt in my mind that that's what the game is.
Yeah. Which is cool.
Yeah.
Well, that is going to do it. Well, that is going to do it for the top 10 board games. Well, at the top 10 and the top 50 board games of all time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the show and to this series. We will be returning shortly with regular scheduled programming. We will be returning back to the every other week format that we have adopted in the year of our Lord 2025. Actually, it's the year of the dragon. So maybe in the year of the dragon. Thank you so much to Heart Society Music for their song, What's on Your Mind, Kid, from their album, Wake the Queens. You can talk to us in the Discord. You can email us at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com. We do read all the emails you send us, except for Mark, who we just star them in the Gmail inbox and then hope he reads them at some indeterminate point in the future. That is all. Thank you, and good night.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
I'm hot. I'm ready. I want you to save me from myself.
Penultimate. It doesn't sound as fancy when you break it out like that.
I do need all those for possible edits on the way you said it. So I appreciate you giving me all the options.
Good. Yeah.
That's how I know
any other
you're
words you
professional.
need?
No. I'll give you a list at the end of the episode.
Mark.
Love it.
Mark.
I'm going to save that for my personal collection. Okay.
Yeah, just at the wrong time. Anyway, no, there's a joke there. But are you going to kick us off now?
Yeah, I'm ready.
It's MN. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the time of the time. All right.
Yeah, that is true. I would rather be the than the Sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, that's harsh.
Number 7. I'm trying to vary my intonation. It's kind of hard because
I think at the end we should record.
Number 7.
At the end we'll record another run of numbers. Yeah.
You want to talk over me again while I do this third one? I'm sorry. It's your turn, M. Let me just do a number 10 countdown to see if we...
Yeah.
Number 10. Number 9. Number 8. Number 7. Number 6. Number 5. Number 4. Number 3. Number 2. And finally, number 1. Not bad.
That's great.
That's good.
That's great. That's great.